Playback. This is of the suspect of the Idaho quadruple murders in court, Bryan Kohberger. Let's listen right here on Live Now.
Division of District Court. This is State of Idaho versus Bryan C. Kohberger, cause number CR 29222805. Mr. Kohberger is present in court. He is in custody. He is appearing with his attorney, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings, on behalf of the state. This is the time set in the matter for initial appearance. Mr. Kohberger, I am going to advise you of the rights that you have in this case. I am going to go over the criminal complaint with you, and then we're going to discuss setting the matter for further hearing. You have the following rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to the presumption of innocence. That means the state bears the burden to prove that you are guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the right to a preliminary hearing. A preliminary hearing is a probable cause hearing. At that hearing, the state must establish that more likely than not, these felony offenses were committed and you were the one that committed the felony offenses. You have a right to have that hearing within 14 days if you remain in custody. If you are bound over at that preliminary hearing to district court, if the court finds probable cause, you would be bound over to district court. And at that time, you can enter a plea of not guilty, and you can have a jury trial set within 6 months of your appearance in district court. At both your preliminary hearing and your jury trial, you have the right to confront and question any evidence or witnesses called against you. Call witnesses on your own behalf, and compel witnesses to be present and testify at the state's expense. You have the right to be represented by a lawyer. If you cannot afford one, one could be appointed to represent you based upon your financial need. You also have the right to appeal any conviction in your case. Do you understand these rights?
Yes.
I am now going to go over the criminal complaint with you. Count 1 of the criminal complaint charges you with the felony offense of burglary. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022, in Latah County, State of Idaho, did unlawfully enter a residence located at 1122 King Road, Moscow, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder, in violation of Idaho Code 18-1401 and 1403. The maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is not less than 1 year in prison, no more than 10 years in prison, and or a $50,000 fine or both. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 2 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, State of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogan, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogan, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. The maximum penalty for this offense, if you were to plead guilty or be found guilty, is death or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 3 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, State of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Kaylee Gonsalves, a human being, by stabbing Kaylee Gonsalves, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is death and or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 4 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing Xana Kernodle, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and/or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 5 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing Ethan Chapin, from which he died, in violation of Idaho Codes 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. And again, the maximum penalty for this offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
And Mr. Kohberger, would you like to represent yourself, hire a lawyer, or see if you qualify for court-appointed counsel?
I have court-appointed counsel.
Court has reviewed your application for attorney at public expense. I do find that you are indigent and do qualify for court-appointed counsel. I will appoint Ms. Taylor to represent you in this case. Ms. Taylor, have you had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Kohberger about speedy preliminary hearing and setting this matter?
Your Honor, I have. We would ask the court to set the status hearing in a week or two to make a final determination.
Okay. And Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings are in agreement with that.
That's fine with the state, Your Honor.
I will go ahead and set this matter for a status hearing then on the calendar on January 12th at 10 o'clock a.m. We will make sure notice is sent, and then Ms. Taylor, do you wish to argue bail at this time?
Your Honor, I would like to ask the court to consider setting a bond. Mr. Kohberger right now is on a no bond hold, but it's a limited request as I don't have enough information. We are new to the case. We haven't reviewed very much in the way of information about the case, and we have just begun our own work on the case. But we would want the court to know that Mr. Kohberger has a good family that stands behind him.
And Mr. Thompson.
The state's position is that Mr. Kohberger is not entitled to bond in this case. We can take charges, as is noted on the arrest warrant itself. Idaho Code 19-816, 19-2903 both specify that given the potential penalties in this case, there's no right to bail. The defendant was arrested 3,000 miles away across the country, where his family is. We ask that he remain in custody. No bail.
At this point in time, pursuant to Idaho Criminal Law 46B and Idaho Code 19-816 and 2903, I am going to leave the bail set at this case as no bail at this point in time until I have additional or further information at a later date and time. So with that, then Mr. Kohberger, you will be remanded in custody and remain in custody on the no bail pending further proceedings in this matter. Is there anything further in the case then for today, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, Your Honor. The state is asking for no contact orders for various family members of the deceased and also for the surviving roommates. I've spoken briefly with Ms. Taylor. She indicated there's no objection.
And Ms. Taylor, is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
So I will go ahead and issue those no contact orders. So I do have a no contact order then for the named individual of Dylan Mortensen, Bethany Funk, as well as the family members and Mr. Chapin, the family members of Ms. Kernodle, Mr. and Ms. Laramie, Mr. Mogan, Ms. Cheeley, and then a number of members of the Gonsalves family. Those specific names will certainly be provided to you, Mr. Kohberger, by way of being provided notice of these documents. You'll get a copy of these no contact orders. What you do need to be advised of, and what will be in this no contact order, is you are prohibited from having any contact with them whatsoever. You cannot contact them through a third person in writing or by any electronic means. You cannot Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, use the phone to communicate with them, or otherwise any form of communication in direct or indirectly with them. You cannot engage in any conduct that would harass, stalk, threaten, use, attempt to use, or threaten to use any physical force or violence upon them, or place them in reasonable fear of bodily injury. Cannot go within or knowingly remain within 300 feet of their person or their home, workplace, or any other place where they might be. There are no exceptions to these orders, and if you do violate these orders, it is a new misdemeanor offense. It is punishable by up to a year in jail and or a $1,000 fine or both. At this point in time, due to being in the magistrate's division here, at this juncture, I am going to issue the no contact orders for a period of 2 years, and then if it needs to be modified or changed by additional judge, it can be done so at that time. Is there anything further, Mr. Thompson?
No, Your Honor.
Anything further, Ms. Taylor?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. We are adjourned.
And that was the first court appearance in Idaho for Bryan Kohberger. This coming on the day that his affidavit was released, getting a lot of new information. And of course, we will be going through that throughout the day here on Live Now from Fox. But I want to keep our coverage going on this topic that has a lot of people talking. We are now bringing in legal analyst Bryan Kohberger. Thank you so much again for joining us here on Live Now to really break down. There's a lot of news that came out of this affidavit that we have not heard about yet. So this is a big day, and we just saw Bryan there in the courtroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first impression is that, the hearing itself is fairly standard. This happens in every case. The person's brought before the judge, they're advised of their charges. And in any case that has a victim or a victim family involved, the court will almost always order a no contact order. And that's just standard form, so that there's no harassing contact. Certainly in a case that involves violence, that is a very normal protocol to have. Nobody should really read into it. That's something that happens literally in every single case, of this type. But I got to tell you, I've seen a copy of that probable cause affidavit, and the one word that comes to mind is bone chilling. That's what I would say about it. It's absolutely bone chilling.
Yeah, I think you pinned it perfect there. Bone chilling is the great word. Let's go through this a little bit from the affidavit. Some of the key takeaways that I saw were that the big one, authorities had this guy pinned just 2 weeks after the November 13th murders there. So when we were seeing these updates from officials, they obviously didn't want to say a lot because they didn't want to tip him off there. But that is big because they knew who they were looking for really quickly.
They did. And I think if I were to guess what the delay was, it takes time for them to get answers to a lot of the things they were looking into. For instance, a DNA lab just needs time to do a DNA test. It's not something that's produced from one day to the next. Sometimes they can take over 30 days to get done. Same thing when they're requesting cell phone data from cellular providers. In that affidavit, a lot of emphasis was given to the location of his cell phone at different times of this case. And again, that's something where you have another company responding to a law enforcement subpoena. They can happen very quickly, or they can take time. Again, they may have had to go back. Maybe they weren't given what they needed. So I can see now why it took a little bit of time for them to develop their case before making an arrest.
And one of the other big things that I was seeing, Bryan, so far from this case that is really interesting when you talk about investigations as well. You know, earlier this week we saw the two videos from police that he was pulled over when he was traveling with his father there. And now we're being told the new details coming out today is that the FBI requested those pullovers to Bryan there. So that is something big to really take in as well, just to kind of really show how this investigation was going.
Absolutely. You know, at first glance, I really thought the traffic stops had nothing to do with this case, because on the particular highway where he was stopped, I-70, law enforcement pulls over out-of-state vehicles all the time. And they're interdiction stops. They're looking for narcotics. They're looking for large sums of currency, pretty standard. But apparently, as it turns out, they've been tracking him for quite a while. And I read an article today that they wanted the Indiana State Police to pull him over to see if they could get some body cam footage of his hands. I don't know if that's true or not, but the thing that struck out to me is that in every photo we have seen of this guy, there isn't a single scratch on him. You know, obviously these pictures are taken a month after the fact, but I remember the O.J. Simpson trial. You know, he was acquitted, but I remember the cut to his hand was a very prominent piece of evidence in that case. And this case, considering there were 4 stabbing homicides, at least 2 of the victims had defensive wounds, you would think that this guy was injured also. Certainly that's what the FBI was interested in determining, but there was nothing there. So that raises a question that I think the defense team will definitely want to look at.
Yes, absolutely. And what about also another really key takeaway in this affidavit, Bryan, was that we learned that one of the roommates saw an individual that they believed to be, now when you look back at everything, to be Bryan, but they saw the individual and didn't say anything and then just locked themselves in the room for hours.
So that's the part that made the chill go up my spine. You know, the worst thing anybody wants to see at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever time it was that night is a man running through their house with a mask on, dressed in all black. That has got to be the scariest thing possible. And I really sympathize with the person that experienced that. And I absolutely understand and do not fault her for locking herself in her bedroom and not wanting to come out for a period of time. I think that's a normal reaction that any person would have. But you're right. You make a very good point. Why did he pass over her? What was this about? You know, it kind of suggests to me that maybe there was something specific about the 4 victims that are involved in this case. You know, I don't know what it is, why maybe he targeted them or didn't target them allegedly, but clearly this remaining person was not a target, or it could be as simple as he just committed 4 murders and he's realizing he's got to get out of there. He didn't have time maybe to complete his task, or maybe he didn't expect this person to be there. Could have been a surprise to him. You know, there's many avenues that this evidence can take, and I think as this case progresses, the answers are going to start falling into place.
Yeah, and we will be there every step of the way. This story has really captured a lot of people's attention across the country, and really, you know, in this day and age with social media, there were so many people that were their own pretty much detectives. It didn't matter if they lived here in the States or anywhere across the country. I think they were their own detective sleuths as well, and they were taking this all in. And is that another reason why we probably, when the police were giving updates, they were so, you know, they really weren't updates at all, frankly, because of the limited information we were getting? But was it because they just knew that there were so many people intrigued about this case and they didn't really want them to uncover something that they didn't want out there public yet?
So at first I thought it was rather suspicious why they were being so silent. But since I saw a video clip where someone was saying something to the effect that there's a law in Idaho where they are not allowed to disclose the contents of a probable cause affidavit until that person is magistrated in court. I don't practice in the state of Idaho. I'm not familiar with that rule, but it reminds me of something in federal court where I do practice. You know, when there's an arrest warrant for somebody, the indictment that has all the charges in it is typically under seal. And that's so that the person is not tipped off that they're in imminent danger of being arrested. And it's not until they're brought into custody and brought before the judge that an order is issued by the court unsealing the indictment. So I figure Idaho probably has a similar law. You know, insofar as the public, I'm sure the police officers investigating this case wanted to share as much as they could. You know, the more information they share with the public in a case like this, the more help they might get. And I'm not talking about the kind of help where you have like an amateur investigator sitting in his basement, you know, thinking he knows what he's talking about. I'm talking about eyewitnesses, people that saw something, people that might have an actual piece of evidence to contribute. But, you know, there's that balance. They're obviously bound by the rules of their state.
Yeah, so true, so true. Another thing I want to talk to you about, Bryan, as well, is from the affidavit, we learned that his cell phone, the suspect's cell phone, pinged around that area 12 different times. Now, could this be looked into something as, you know, was he planning this, you know, in detail, and was he, you know, just a stalker type level here? What can we look into that part of the affidavit there with the cell phone?
So for my purposes as a lawyer, I don't see it from that perspective initially. You know, that's obviously where I think a lot of the exciting part for the true crime sleuths comes in. But for me, as a practitioner in the courtroom, the defense team has to go and check into this evidence, make sure it's accurate, make sure it's true. Just because the police say it's so doesn't make it so. So that's one of the primary areas of investigation for the defense team right now, number one. Number two, the part that really stuck out to me is not where his phone was pinging, it's when it was not pinging. According to the probable cause affidavit, at the time of the homicides, his phone was not connected to the network. Now, that could mean he was in an area where there's poor cell service, which may not be uncommon in that part of Idaho, or he disconnected his phone from the network so that he couldn't be tracked. You know, of course, this is all conjecture. These are things that need to be looked at, but it's certainly one of the aspects of the affidavit that stuck out in my mind.
Yeah, that was another big one that we zeroed in. If you're just joining us here, everyone, on Live Now from Fox, we are taking a look here at just moments ago. Bryan Kohberger made his first court appearance there in Idaho, and we are talking to Brian Silber, legal analyst, helping us break down all of the big day of news that came out of this case. You know, it came all in one big tidal wave here with the affidavit and probable cause that we all got. Now, what is going to be the next steps here for Bryan here, and when can we see a possible trial date?
So the next step will be a hearing called arraignment. Okay, at arraignment, the defendant will be brought before the judge that will preside over his case, which can be a different judge than the one that handled the hearing today, who only handled the magistrate portion. And at that time, he will be apprised of the formal charges he's facing, and he'll be asked to determine whether or not he's pleading guilty, not guilty, or no contest. Obviously, he's going to plead not guilty. When a case is pled not guilty, it then affords the defense an opportunity to conduct their investigation. They will engage in what's called discovery with the prosecution. The prosecution has a duty to disclose all the evidence that they have collected in the case. In some states, and I'm not sure if this is the case in Idaho, but in some states, the defense is entitled to do depositions where they're able to bring in every witness in a case and basically question them about what they know. I expect between now and the trial date for there to be a lot of litigation. There's going to be a bunch of motions filed by the defense. Certainly, they're going to want to compel evidence. They might have some motions to suppress evidence because maybe there was a violation of procedure committed by the police and how they acquired that evidence. For instance, I don't believe the traffic stop in Indiana was a legal one. I think it was pretextual because they wanted to see his hands. I don't think it was a legitimate traffic stop. So, of course, any evidence discovered as a result would be subject to suppression. But insofar as a trial date, they'll have a trial date set eventually, but that can be moved. This is a case that I would see going to trial at least no shorter than a year from now. Could be up to 2-3 years, depending on how the investigation unfolds and how any of the pretrial litigation, what takes place in various rulings by the court.
There we go. All right. So thank you so much. This was Bryan Silber, once again, legal analyst, joining us here on Live Now from Fox. We really appreciate it here today on a story that will continue to evolve as the trial and court proceedings continue. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No